Didn't know his uncle. Now we learn that Mr. Obama not only knew him, but he lived with him. And the question is this a big deal? We're talking about it right now. To break it down for us, Professor Julian Zelzer. He's a historian at Princeton, and David Gergen, who joins us from Atlanta. He is a CNN senior political analyst and a former White House advisor to 4 presidents. Gentlemen, thank you for being here. David, let's start with you. You know what it's like to work in a White House and deal with media questions, especially on sensitive issues. How, however, does a White House put out false information like it did on the president's relationship to an uncle?
Well, let me say for beginners, I don't think this is a big deal. I think it's a modest deal. I think it reflects the sloppiness within the White House operation. But we've had other presidents who've had relatives who have rather inconvenient histories, let us say. And there's always been a fairly strong effort by the White House staff distance the president from that inconvenient relative, if possible, and that seems to what has gone on here. What is odd is that the president must have known that his team was putting out the word that he didn't know this fellow and never met him, and it's odd that he didn't correct the record then.
Yeah, and let me ask you, Professor Zelzer, do you get the feeling here that Obama aides simply didn't want to dig too hard because they didn't want it getting out that the president has an uncle here who's illegal? He had the same problem with an aunt just a couple of years ago. She, too, was here without proper papers.
Well, it could be they wanted to protect him, and it could be that they didn't want this story to suddenly be connected to the president. But I think rather than a case of deception, I do think this is a case of sloppiness. And this is a theme we've now heard both with health care and with this, that causes problems for the president when it probably doesn't have to cause a problem. And I think that's why this is blowing up in a week where this was not supposed to be the story.
And it's interesting because you hear, Ana Navarro saying that this was sort of an unforced error, but it really does affect ultimately the numbers in terms of people regarding him as truthful or not truthful. I want to turn to Obamacare. We heard the president say more than once that he wasn't told the health care website was in such bad shape. Now Politico magazine reports that an outfit called the Government Accountability Institute finds the president and HHS Secretary Kathleen Sebelius held just a single one-on-one meeting after Obamacare was signed into law over 3 years ago. We should note that the White House is taking issue with this article. Jay Carney saying that the report's misleading and based on a ridiculously false premise. Those are his words. David Gergen, what do you think about this?
I think this is a bigger deal. And I don't think this is simply sloppiness on the part of the White House. I disagree with Professor Zelzer. What seems to me is there's a case of near malfeasance here. At the same time, 3 years passed with no one-on-one meetings, according to the Politico article. The president had 277 one-on-one meetings with other members of his cabinet, Hillary Clinton having the largest number, but Secretary Geithner has some 27 meetings. I know the economy is essential, and it's good he was meeting with Secretary Geithner, but here on his signature issue, not to take charge, and I have no doubt the White House is right that the Secretary Sebelius was in several group meetings with the president about health care, but the whole point is there was nobody in charge in the administration the president was turning to and saying, I look to you for overall responsibility. And in this case, it should have been the Secretary of Health and Human Services. She does run the department that oversees this. And the fact that he was not meeting with her one-on-one, I think, frankly, is not so much an indictment of her, but of the White House operation.
Which is fascinating because we saw her testify very publicly and she took full responsibility for what had happened. But at the same time, if this was so important to the president, you would think that there was a lot more one-on-one interaction, especially on something that's so critical to him and his policy. Professor Zelzer, the president went on MSNBC this week. He was asked about his management of the White House and his cabinet, and he said that, quote, generally speaking, my theory has been, number one, that yes, I've got a strong chief of staff, but I'm holding every cabinet member accountable, and I want to have strong interactions with them directly. Number two, I have an open door policy, he said, where I want people to be bringing me bad news on time so that we can fix things. Well, putting all that aside, how often Kathleen Sebelius did or did not meet with the president? What does that suggest, especially because she's now the one who's taking the heat, taking the fire, and ultimately taking the responsibility?
Well, on that story, we have to be careful because, as the White House said, that does come from a conservative organization and individual who published that account, and they're disputing it. So we need to see the reality of the one-on-one before we make the judgment. That said, there is no doubting that the rollout of the health care was not properly executed, and we now have more than enough stories that the president and his team were, in fact, aware. They were meeting and aware of the problems that were emerging. So that is a more serious story, and I think implementation matters. There was one person who said ideas are 1% of politics and implementation is 99%, and they dropped the ball on that.
Absolutely. Well, David Gergen, is this bad management? Is this bad staffing? Is this bad messaging?
Well, I'm sure the White House now, in retrospect, thinks it's probably a combination of the above. But I was surprised this week when the president told Chris Matthews in an interview that he really didn't think he had to reflect upon his management style. Everything was fine in the White House. The real problem was the fact that we have such large agencies in government. There are big bureaucracies. It's hard to get things done. Well, first of all, he's in charge. As president. He is the chief executive. He's had 5 years to address that issue if that's what he really thinks. And secondly, if he really thinks the bureaucracy is incapable of handling problems like this, why did he assign the health care issue to them? So I think this is a pretty serious issue. I do think that's important. I think this president has many good assets. I think there are many good things about him. But the management by this White House team has left, I think, especially in recent times, left much to be desired.
And Julian Zelzer, final word on this. Do you see this as a leadership issue?
Well, yes. It could be a defining part of his presidency. Jimmy Carter is remembered for bad management, and that could happen to him. The good news is there's still a lot of time in his presidency, and this is an era where you can remake yourself. So if they fix this health care program and it's up and running, I don't think this is what we're going to be talking about. If he doesn't, this could be one of the issues we think about when we think about President Obama.
All right, Julian Zelzer and David Gergen, thank you, gentlemen, so much for being here with us today.
Thank you.